I thought my marriage was perfect, until I found this hidden in her purse. I always thought the slow unraveling of a marriage would be marked by screaming matches, slammed doors, and tear-soaked apologies. But for us, it was quiet, insidiously quiet, like a rope fraying one strand at a time. By the time I realized what was happening, the fibers were nearly gone, and there was nothing left to hold us together. My name is David. I'm 38 years old, a steady, predictable man. I've always prided myself on being reliable. I work as a financial consultant at a mid-sized firm, and I'd spent the last 10 years building what I thought was a strong, stable life with my wife, Sophia. She's everything I'm not: ambitious, charismatic, and always the center of attention at parties. The perfect power couple, or so I believed. Looking back, there were signs. There always are. It's easy to see them when you know where to look, but at the time I didn't. How could I? Trust is like gravity. You don't question it until it's gone. It started with the little things. Sophia began staying late at work more often. She'd come home around 9 or 10, heels clicking across the floor as she tossed her purse onto the kitchen counter. Another late meeting. I'd asked, trying to keep the edge out of my voice. "Yeah," she'd replied breezily. "You know how it is with these clients, demanding every second of your time." She'd smile, kiss me on the cheek, and head upstairs to change. At first, I believed her. She'd always been a workaholic, and I admired her drive. But then came the subtle shifts in behavior that, looking back, seemed glaring. There was the lingerie, expensive, delicate sets in lace and silk that appeared in her drawer. I remember holding up one particularly intricate piece one evening. "This is new," I said, genuinely curious. Sophia glanced over her shoulder, barely sparing it a glance. "Just something I bought on sale. Thought I'd treat myself." "I'd never seen you wear it," I said lightly, though something twisted in my gut. "I've been so exhausted lately," she replied. "You know how it is." It was a perfectly reasonable answer, or at least I convinced myself it was. We drifted apart slowly. There wasn't a big fight or a dramatic turning point. Instead, it was the small things, the kind of erosion you don't notice until the landscape is unrecognizable. Conversations became shorter, filled with stock phrases and generic pleasantries. "How was your day?" "Fine." "What's for dinner?" "I don't know." She stopped asking about my life entirely. My work, my friends, my worries. I felt like furniture in my own home. Necessary but unremarkable. One evening, we attended her company's annual holiday party. Sophia looked stunning in a sleek, emerald green dress that hugged her figure in all the right places. As usual, she was the star of the show, effortlessly mingling with coworkers and clients alike. I stood by the bar, nursing a whiskey and watching her light up the room. That's when I saw him for the first time. Ethan. Tall, polished, and magnetic, Ethan seemed to command attention without even trying. He was her boss, though they looked more like scene partners in a romantic drama. The way he laughed at her jokes, how his hand lingered a beat too long on her lower back, it sent a quiet alarm through my mind. I shook it off. "Don't be ridiculous," I told myself. "It's just the whiskey talking." But that night, when Sophia fell asleep, I stayed awake. The quiet hum of doubt had taken root, and it wouldn't let go. The weeks that followed were tense. Sophia's absences stretched longer, and her excuses grew thinner. She stopped bothering to explain why she was late, brushing me off with a curt, "I told you I'd be working late," before disappearing upstairs. I began to investigate. It wasn't a dramatic decision. I didn't wake up one morning determined to play detective. Instead, it was a gradual unraveling, an itch I couldn't scratch until I knew the truth. The first clue came in the form of a hotel receipt I found crumpled in the bottom of her purse. I unfolded it carefully, my heart pounding as I read the date. 2 nights earlier. A room booked under her name at a boutique hotel across town. I stared at the slip of paper for a long time, my brain trying to make sense of it. By now, I wasn't naive enough to pretend there was another explanation. Still, I needed more than a receipt to confront her. I needed undeniable proof, not just for her sake, but for mine. I started small, checking her phone logs, her emails, and her credit card statements when she wasn't looking. It felt wrong, like I was betraying her trust. But then I remembered that she'd already betrayed mine. What I found was worse than I could have imagined. The hotel stays weren't isolated incidents. They were frequent, monthly, then weekly. The same pattern repeated itself. Late meetings that didn't exist, charges for dinners she never mentioned, and strings of emails that read like thinly veiled code. Then came the pictures. I hired a private investigator, a quiet, efficient man named Harris, to do the work I couldn't. I didn't want to follow my wife around like a shadow. I didn't want to see her with him. But I needed the truth, however much it hurt. Harris delivered everything in a plain manila folder a week later. I didn't open it right away. I set it on the kitchen table and stared at it for hours, as if keeping it closed could make the truth disappear. When I finally looked, the pain was sharp and immediate. There she was, my wife of 10 years, wrapped in Ethan's arms outside a hotel. Her face tilted up to kiss him, her smile brighter than it had been for me in years. I sat in the silence of my kitchen, the photos spread before me like the broken pieces of our life. My hands trembled, not with anger, but with the cold realization that my marriage was already over. For days, I walked around in a fog, unsure of what to do. Confronting Sophia felt pointless. She'd deny it, twist it, and gaslight me into believing I was paranoid. I knew her well enough to predict that much. So instead, I did something unexpected. I waited. I let her think she'd won. I smiled when she came home late, kissed her cheek, and played the role of the clueless husband. It was exhausting, but I knew I needed time to plan, time to make sure that when her house of cards came crashing down, there'd be no chance to rebuild. "You're quiet lately," Sophia said one night over dinner, tilting her head. "Everything okay?" I looked at her for a long moment, forcing a smile. "Yeah, just tired. Work's been rough." "I know the feeling," she replied with a sigh, swirling her wine. I watched her across the table, this woman I no longer recognized, and quietly decided that she would never see the wreckage coming. If Sophia noticed anything different about me over the next few weeks, she didn't let on. Her life continued as normal, or as normal as it could be for someone living a double life. She was still coming home late, still flashing me that practiced smile, and still carrying herself like a woman who believed she had everything under control. But I had changed. Knowing the truth had stripped away my delusions, but in their place came clarity. I spent my days at work in a haze, watching the clock and counting down the minutes until I could act. The nights were worse. I'd lie awake, replaying every lie she'd ever told, every excuse she'd given me, until I could barely breathe. It wasn't just betrayal, it was humiliation. She'd made me into a fool, and I couldn't let it stand. The plan didn't come to me all at once. It was built piece by piece, like a puzzle that only made sense when the final piece clicked into place. I didn't want to hurt her physically, and I didn't want petty revenge. No, I wanted her to feel the same crushing sense of loss and failure that she'd inflicted on me. And Ethan? He wasn't going to walk away unscathed either. I met with Harris, the private investigator, again. I didn't need more photos. I had enough evidence to ruin her. Instead, I needed details, information that could be weaponized. "Find out everything you can about Ethan," I told him. "His family, his work, his finances, everything." Harris nodded, his face expressionless. "This isn't my first rodeo," he replied. "You'll have it in a week." While Harris worked, I started piecing together Sophia's professional life. She'd been with her company for years, and in that time, she'd built a reputation as their top account manager. She wined and dined the firm's most valuable clients, smoothing deals with a charm that came naturally to her. Her success was her pride and joy, and I knew exactly how to rip it away. I spent long hours poring over her work emails and documents on our shared computer. She'd been careless, using the same password across all her accounts. I found everything I needed: private notes about key clients, reports about ongoing deals, and most importantly, the relationships she'd spent so much time nurturing. The information Harris brought me was gold. Ethan, as it turned out, was just as flawed as Sophia. He was married to a woman named Melissa, a sweet-looking elementary school teacher who had no idea what kind of man her husband really was. They had 2 kids and a dog, a picture-perfect family on the outside. Harris even dug up financial trouble. Ethan had been funneling money into a private account, likely to prepare for a future with Sophia. The arrogance of it made me sick. He'd risked everything, his marriage, his career, on an affair that would inevitably implode. The only question was when. The first seeds of destruction were planted subtly. I created an anonymous email account and sent Melissa a single, carefully worded message. Your husband is not the man you think he is. Check his recent hotel charges. I attached a photo, just one, of Sophia and Ethan walking into a hotel, his hand resting intimately on her back. I didn't expect a response. I didn't need one. That was the beauty of the truth. Once revealed, it couldn't be ignored. The next part of the plan required more finesse. Sophia had been courting a massive client for months, a deal that, if closed, would secure her position at the company for years. I knew how much it meant to her. She talked about it endlessly at dinner, oblivious to the fact that I was no longer listening out of love but strategy. Using the information I'd gathered from her emails, I reached out to the client directly. I didn't accuse Sophia of anything outright. Instead, I posed as a concerned third party and planted a seed of doubt. Would you trust your company's future with someone who doesn't respect boundaries? Do some digging. You might be surprised by what you find. That was all it took. Corporate clients are skittish creatures, wary of scandal and impropriety. Within days, the rumors started to spread through Sophia's firm. Whispers turned into questions, and questions turned into problems she couldn't solve. I didn't have to wait long for the cracks to turn into collapse. It started with small tremors. Sophia came home one night looking distracted, her phone clutched tightly in her hand. "What's wrong?" I asked innocently, sipping my drink. "Nothing," she said too quickly. "Just work drama." I nodded sympathetically, biting back a smile. I knew exactly what was happening. 2 days later, she was scrambling to save the client she'd spent months winning over. The deal was falling apart, and she had no idea why. I watched her spiral, her phone glued to her ear, her voice taking on that sharp edge I'd grown so familiar with. By the end of the week, the client officially pulled out. Sophia was devastated. "It doesn't make sense." She fumed that night, pacing the living room. Everything was perfect. Why would they back out now? I shrugged. "Maybe there's something you missed." Her glare was icy, but I didn't care. For the first time in months, I felt alive. The final blow came on a Thursday. Melissa, the saint of a wife Ethan had so carelessly betrayed, did exactly what I'd hoped she would. She stormed into his office, dossier in hand, and turned his world upside down. Word spread like wildfire through Sophia's firm. By noon, everyone knew about the affair. By 3 o'clock, Ethan was out of a job, escorted from the building like a criminal. Sophia was left standing in the wreckage. Without Ethan to shield her, the scrutiny turned to her. HR called her into a meeting, and when she came home that night, she looked pale and hollow. "I don't know what's happening," she whispered, sinking onto the couch. "Everything's falling apart." I didn't answer her right away. I let the silence stretch, let her sit in the destruction she'd created. Then I handed her the envelope. "What's this?" she asked, her hands trembling as she opened it. "Read it," I said coldly. Her eyes scanned the divorce papers and the letter I'd written, detailing everything I knew. The lies, the hotels, the humiliation she'd put me through without a second thought. You knew." Her voice cracked. "For 6 months," I replied, "and I just watched." The night I handed Sophia the envelope felt like the closing scene of a play. She sat there, frozen, staring at the divorce papers as if she could will them into nothingness. For the first time in months, the house was quiet. Not the uneasy silence that had hung between us lately, but something colder, final. "You knew for 6 months," she whispered again, as though repeating it might change the truth. I didn't answer her. There was nothing left to say. The sound of my footsteps echoed as I grabbed my pre-packed duffel bag and walked out the door, leaving her to the ruins of her carefully curated life. That night, I checked into a modest apartment I'd rented across town. The space was bare, white walls, second-hand furniture, a mattress on the floor. But it was mine. My old life with Sophia had been built on lies, even before I'd realized it, and the silence of this place was a welcome reprieve. I sat on the edge of the bed, the duffel bag still at my feet, and exhaled a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. I spent the next few days in solitude. I didn't go to work. I didn't answer texts or calls. Not that Sophia reached out. I imagined her pacing our old house, trying to make sense of the chaos. I didn't care. She was finally feeling the weight of everything she'd done. When I wasn't sleeping, I sat by the window, staring at the city lights in the distance. At first, I thought I'd feel triumphant. After all, I'd succeeded in everything I'd set out to do. Sophia's career was in shambles. Ethan had lost everything, and their affair was exposed for the world to see. But triumph wasn't what I felt. There was a strange hollowness instead, as though destroying her life hadn't quite filled the void she'd left in mine. Sophia's unraveling became public news faster than I'd anticipated. It started small, whispers at her firm, rumors trickling through professional circles. Then came the fallout. Ethan's firing and the subsequent scandal turned into gossip fodder for office workers across the city. Corporate firms are ruthless when it comes to their image, and Sophia's firm was no exception. On the fourth day after I left, I got a call from an old friend, Mark. I hadn't spoken to him in weeks, but I wasn't surprised he'd heard. "David," he said, his voice a mix of curiosity and concern, "are you okay? I mean, I heard what happened." "I'm fine," I replied flatly. "Man," he sighed, "people are talking. Sophia's name is everywhere. I don't know. I thought you might want to know." "Let them talk," I said, ending the call. I told myself it didn't matter. Sophia had made her choices, and now she was reaping the consequences. Still, there was a small, nagging part of me that wondered how much farther the ripples would spread. A week after I left, I ran into Melissa, the wife Ethan had betrayed. It happened in a small coffee shop near my apartment. I was standing in line when I noticed her at one of the tables, her face pale and drawn. Her fingers traced the rim of her coffee cup as she stared blankly ahead, as though lost in thought. I thought about leaving. I didn't owe her anything, but something held me there. I bought my coffee, hesitated, then walked over. "Melissa?" I said softly. She looked up, startled. Her eyes widened when she saw me. "David." Her voice was tentative, as though unsure how to address me. I nodded and gestured to the empty chair. "Mind if I sit?" She shook her head, and I lowered myself into the seat across from her. For a long moment, neither of us said anything. I sipped my coffee, studying her. Melissa looked like someone who'd been through hell. I imagined I didn't look much better. "How are you holding up?" I asked finally. She let out a bitter laugh. "How do you think?" Her voice wavered, and she shook her head. "He destroyed everything. My marriage, my trust." Her gaze flicked up to meet mine. "And you? You're Sophia's husband, right?" "Was," I corrected. "The papers are filed." She nodded slowly, then leaned back in her chair, folding her arms. "Did you send me that letter?" "I did." For a moment, I thought she might lash out, blame me for upending her life. But instead, her expression softened. "I'm glad you did," she said quietly. "I would have lived in the dark forever if you hadn't." We sat there for a while, two strangers connected by betrayal, sharing the quiet understanding that only those who'd been broken could share. The encounter with Melissa stayed with me long after I left the coffee shop. It made me think about everything I'd done, about the choices I'd made. Revenge had been my only focus for so long that I hadn't stopped to consider what came after. Now that Sophia's world was in pieces, where did that leave me? I spent the next few weeks rebuilding, not just my life, but myself. I went back to work, throwing myself into projects to keep my mind busy. I reconnected with friends I'd drifted away from during my marriage. Slowly, piece by piece, I started to feel like my old self again, Or maybe a new version of myself, one shaped by the pain of the last year. Sophia, on the other hand, wasn't so lucky. I heard through mutual friends that she'd been fired from her firm. With the scandal attached to her name, no one wanted to hire her. She'd moved in with her sister and was working a dead-end job to pay the bills. I should have felt satisfied. I should have been happy that she was getting exactly what she deserved. But the truth was, I didn't feel much of anything at all. The anger that had fueled me for months was gone, and in its place was a quiet emptiness. I realized that revenge hadn't healed me. It hadn't fixed the cracks in my heart or given me back the years I'd wasted on a woman who never really loved me. But maybe healing wasn't about fixing the past. Maybe it was about letting go. It's been a year now since I walked out of that house. I've moved into a better apartment, one with windows that let in sunlight and walls that no longer feel suffocating. I've started dating again, cautiously, and I've met someone, Emma. She's kind and grounded, someone who sees me for who I am, not who I pretended to be. Sometimes, when I think back on my marriage to Sophia, I feel a twinge of regret, not for what I did, but for what I let happen to me. I stayed in the dark for too long, believing in a lie because it was easier than facing the truth. I still see Sophia sometimes on social media or in passing glimpses of old photos. I don't hate her anymore. Hate is too heavy to carry, and I'm done bearing that weight. She made her choices, and I made mine. The difference is, I'm moving forward. And for the first time in years, I feel free. Freedom is a strange thing. For months, I imagined that once I escaped the shadow of my failed marriage, I'd feel nothing but lightness, an unburdened existence, free of doubt and resentment. But the truth is, ghosts have a way of following you. Even when you think you've moved on, the past lingers like smoke in the air, impossible to catch but always present. It was a cold morning in late October when Sophia reappeared in my life, unexpected, unwanted. I was at work, reviewing client portfolios in my small windowed office, when my assistant, Lily, knocked softly on the door. "David?" she said, her tone hesitant. "Yeah?" I didn't look up, my focus still fixed on the spreadsheet. "There's someone here to see you," she said. "She doesn't have an appointment, but she insists she needs to talk to you. Says it's important." The edge in her voice made me pause. I looked up, already dreading the answer. "What's her name?" "Sophia." The sound of her name hit me like a slap. I set down my pen, exhaling slowly as I pushed back from the desk. "Send her in." The door opened a minute later, and there she was. Sophia stood in the doorway, looking like a ghost of the woman I used to know. She'd always been put together, perfect hair, flawless makeup, and an expensive wardrobe that matched her professional ambition. But now her clothes were wrinkled, her once bright eyes tired and hollow. "David," she said softly, stepping inside and closing the door behind her. I didn't stand to greet her. "What do you want, Sophia?" Her gaze flickered to the chair across from me, but she didn't sit. Instead, she clutched her purse in front of her, as if it were a shield. "I need to talk to you. We don't have anything to talk about." "Please," she said, her voice breaking. "Just give me a few minutes. I don't know who else to turn to." I stared at her for a long moment. There was a time when her vulnerability would have melted me, when I would have done anything to comfort her, no matter how much she hurt me. But that time had passed. "You've got 5 minutes," I said flatly. She sank into the chair, her shoulders sagging with relief. For a moment, she said nothing, her fingers fidgeting with the strap of her purse, her gaze darting to the framed photo on my desk. It was a picture of me and Emma, taken a few weeks ago on a trip to the coast. We were laughing, the sunlight catching her red hair as she leaned into me. Sophia's lips pressed into a thin line. "I see you've moved on," she said quietly. "Why are you here, Sophia?" She swallowed hard, her eyes flicking back to mine. "I've lost everything, David. My job, my reputation, my savings." Her voice faltered. I didn't know how bad it would get. Ethan, he left me. Disappeared as soon as things got messy. I thought he cared about me. "Did you?" I said, the bitterness creeping into my tone despite my best efforts. "I'd think you of all people. would know what betrayal feels like. Her eyes filled with tears, but I didn't let it sway me. She played the victim for years, and I wasn't going to fall for it now. I didn't come here to fight, she said, wiping at her eyes. I don't know how to start over, David. I don't have anyone. My sister's barely speaking to me, my friends won't return my calls, and I can't get a job anywhere because of the scandal. I'm lost. There was a flicker of something in my chest, pity, maybe, but I pushed it down. What do you expect me to do? Bail you out? No, she shook her head quickly. I wanted to apologize. For everything. For what I did to you. You didn't deserve it. Her words hung in the air like a stone dropped into water, sending ripples through the room. For months, I dreamed of this moment. Sophia sitting in front of me, broken and contrite. I thought hearing her say she was sorry would bring me closure. But now, with the apology hanging between us, it didn't feel like victory. It felt hollow. Apology accepted, I said finally, though the words felt meaningless. But I can't help you, Sophia. That's not my place anymore. She nodded slowly, as if she'd expected the answer. She stood, pulling her purse tighter against her shoulder. I'm sorry, David, she said again, her voice barely above a whisper. For everything. And then she left. I sat at my desk for a long time after Sophia walked out, staring at the door as if she might come back. My heart didn't race. My hands didn't shake. It was strange to realize that the woman who had once dominated my life no longer held any power over me. Sophia's apology was too little, too late, but it wasn't for her that I felt something. It was for the man I used to be, the one who believed in her, who trusted so blindly that he let himself become a shadow of who he was. I picked up the photo of Emma and me, my thumb brushing the glass as I studied her smile. Emma had come into my life quietly, without fanfare, but she'd brought with her a warmth I hadn't realized I was missing. She didn't try to fix me. She just accepted me as I was, scars and all. Sophia was my past, but Emma was my future. That night, when I got home, I found Emma sitting cross-legged on the couch, a book open in her lap. She looked up as I walked in, her face breaking into a smile. You're late, she said, setting the book aside. Everything okay? I sat beside her, wrapping an arm around her shoulders as I kissed the top of her head. Yeah, I said softly, everything's fine. And for the first time in a long time, I meant it. Sophia's reappearance in my life had been a test, a reminder of the man I used to be and the life I'd left behind. Seeing her broken didn't bring me the satisfaction I thought it would, but maybe that was the point. Revenge hadn't healed me. Time hadn't healed me. But choosing to let go, that's what set me free. In the months that followed, I stopped looking over my shoulder. I stopped replaying the betrayal in my mind like a broken record. I stopped thinking about Sophia altogether. Emma and I built a life together, a real one with late-night conversations, quiet mornings over coffee, and laughter that filled every corner of our apartment. I still carried the scars of my past, but I wore them proudly. They were proof that I'd survived, that I'd come out the other side stronger. One evening, as Emma and I stood on our balcony, watching the sun dip below the horizon, she slipped her hand into mine. David, she said softly. Yeah? You're happy, right? I looked at her, at the woman who'd shown me that love could be simple and honest and real. Yeah, I said, squeezing her hand. I am. And for the first time, the ghosts of the past faded into nothingness, leaving only the promise of everything yet to come. They say the past never really dies. It simply waits for the right moment to resurface. For years, I believed I had put the worst behind me, neatly locking away the memories of Sophia and everything she represented. I thought love had given me a clean slate, a chance to start over with Emma. But the past is rarely so cooperative. It happened on a Sunday morning. Emma and I were sitting at the small table on our balcony, enjoying our ritual of coffee and fresh pastries. The autumn breeze carried the smell of rain, and Emma was laughing at something I'd said, a sound that never failed to remind me how lucky I was. Her red hair glowed in the golden sunlight, and for a moment I felt completely at peace. Then my phone rang. I glanced at the screen and froze. It was an unknown number. I rarely got calls on weekends, and the unfamiliar digits immediately set me on edge. "Do you need to get that?" Emma asked, raising an eyebrow. "It's probably spam," I replied, brushing it off. But something told me to answer. 1 second. I stepped inside, closing the balcony door behind me. "Hello?" The voice on the other end was hesitant, almost nervous. "Is this David?" "Yes. Who's this?" "It's Harris," the voice said. My heart skipped a beat. Harris, the private investigator I'd hired years ago to uncover Sophia's affair. I hadn't spoken to him in years. Why was he calling me now? "Harris?" I said, confused. "What's going on?" "I know this is unexpected, David," he said, his voice low. "But something's come up. I've come across some information, and, well, I thought you'd want to know. It's about Sophia." Sophia. Hearing her name again sent a jolt through me, but not in the way it once would have. It wasn't anger or heartbreak. It was curiosity laced with suspicion. What could possibly be left to know? "What about her?" I asked, my tone firm. "There's no easy way to say this," Harris continued. "But Sophia, she's dead." The words landed like a fist to my chest. I staggered slightly, gripping the edge of the kitchen counter as my mind tried to process what I'd just heard. "Dead," I repeated as if saying it out loud would make it less real. "What happened?" "It looks like an accident," Harris said. "But something about it doesn't sit right with me. That's why I called. I thought you should know." The room felt too small. I pressed a hand to my forehead, trying to think straight. "When did this happen?" 2 days ago. She was found in her apartment. Official cause of death is listed as an overdose, pills and alcohol. But I've seen these kinds of cases before, David. It doesn't add up." "Why call me?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. I haven't spoken to her in years. Harris paused. "I just thought you'd want closure. Or maybe the truth."